Got more callers on the line. Isaiah in Oklahoma, how are you?
Oh, I'm first? Oh, damn.
You're second,
You're
actually.
second, but...
Well, I'm first among the believers.
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it was fine. Okay. Well, how are y'all doing today?
Doing well.
Not bad.
Miss, I'm doing the same. Okay, just a disclosure. I don't expect to convince anyone of anything today. Just want to throw that out right now.
Do you expect to convince me that you don't expect to convince me of anything? I'm sorry. That was a philosophy nerd joke.
I'm not very good at philosophy, so that went over my head, admittedly.
Well, depending on who you talk to, neither am I.
All right, but I don't expect to convince anyone of anything, but at the very least, I hope to entertain you guys. At the very most, I hope to give you something to think about when you're on the toilet.
Okay.
All right. A little too late for that,
Right.
but it's fine. It's fine.
So, I was told by what's the name of the lady who takes the calls?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the call screener.
I'm not necessarily sure who wants their name out and who doesn't. So we'll just go with the call screener.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Right. I'm sorry, but Anyway, well, she did not seem impressed with me, but that's okay.
Okay.
But,
She's probably just busy, but go ahead.
yeah, I understand she's doing her job. But anyway, she asked me that. She said that you would probably ask me what I believe in. That would probably be like one of the first things you asked.
Yeah, we tend to want to know what people believe and why, but looking at the call screener's notes here, it seemed that you had a question for us.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, I suppose I could start by answering that question now, since it was probably one that was going to come up.
You're kind of breaking up right now. It's hard to hear you.
I'm sorry. Hang on 1 second. Is that better?
Actually, no.
No,
but
not right now. Keep talking a little bit.
I tell you what, while you might try to reposition or whatever else, the question here that we were told you were going to ask is, if there's a God, would we want to know? Is that?
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Right. The answer to that question is yes.
Sure.
And then the second question was listed here was, what would a God look like to you? And my answer is, I have no idea.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I have some minimum thing. Like if you told me, hey, a God exists and it's this coffee cup, I'm going to say, okay, well, now you're kind of playing games with the traditional notion of what a God is. There's some minimum set, but I don't have a full package. I'm willing to go with, you tell me what God you believe in and why you think that God exists, and I can then begin to evaluate whether I agree or disagree.
Okay. Well, let me rephrase that second question a little bit. When someone brings up when someone brings up the subject of God, like, what's the first thing that would pop into your head? Like, if I ask, what do you think of when you think of Superman? Like, you know immediately what comes to mind.
Yeah.
So I'm asking, like, what would be the first thing that comes to mind when, like, someone mentions God?
So once upon a time, the first thing that would come to mind would have been the God that I believed in when I was a fundamentalist Southern Baptist Christian.
Yeah.
And so it's unavoidable. I mean, when somebody says God, my first instinct is to go with that understanding. However, in the many years that I've been doing this, I've trained myself to not go with my first instinct. And instead, my thought is, okay, what God are they talking about? Because it's a mistake for you to say, hey, I believe in God, and for me to go, oh, well, you must be talking about the God that I used to believe in, and that God's bullshit for this reason or that reason. Instead, I get over what my first instinct is and say, I need you to tell me what God you're talking about. At least, you don't have to give like every detail of God, but I just want to make sure we're roughly on the same page.
Right, because there's a lot of variance out there.
Okay.
People take it like to a spiritual thing to say like, oh, just God is the universe, or God is truth, or something along those lines. That is a far cry away from what I was taught.
Yeah, somebody
what a deity was.
Not too long ago said God is that which is worshipped, which I think is a ridiculous definition, because people are going to worship the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that doesn't make them God in any sense that we would normally talk about in theology and philosophy and things like that.
Right, absolutely. I actually agree with you on all of that.
And quick side note for anybody who thinks I'm actually a sports fan, no, I just watched The Good Place, and that's why Jacksonville Jaguars came to mind. But anyway, go ahead, Isaiah. Your turn.
Such a good show.
Okay, well, what I'm going at here is, And I am admittedly a kind of a slow thinker, so I apologize if it takes me a minute to formulate my thought. But what I'm getting at here is a particular concept, and this concept could be, by some people, perceived as a God, and honestly, that's what I've chosen to do. So yes, I believe in a God.
Okay.
So,
what's the concept?
Okay. Well, what I'm talking about is essentially a cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Okay,
I'm convinced. Well, depending on how far you want to extend the cycle analogy, yes, birth, death, life, those things I'm fine with, and I don't think that, depending on how you describe the cycle, I'm not convinced that there is a cycle, because it's not like I'm convinced that my specific cycle, I was born, I lived, I will die. I don't think that is actually cyclical. I don't think I'm going to be reborn. So if you want to extend it that far, you lost me. But I also don't know. I don't think that referring to the birth, life, death cycle, to whatever extent it is a cycle, is anything that I would reasonably consider God in any theological or philosophical sense. It seems more metaphorical.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. Sure. Now, what I'm getting at is, okay. Well, let me basically emphasize on your point. So, basically, from experience, from what a lot of religions basically dictate, a God is someone who is personified as one of us, right? It's basically, someone who's recognizable as like a human being or something like that.
No.
Or they could at least take the human shape. No.
Typically, I mean, you could say that they were roughly analogous to us, but what tends to be the case is that we're talking about a super powerful thinking agent. So in the sense that they are a mind of some sort that can have an intentional stance and take action. But most of them don't hold, well, maybe I shouldn't say most. The traditionally most popular gods, for example, the God of classical theology is this omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, blah, blah, blah. And this has been reformulated a bit by theologians and philosophers to avoid some of the problems. But I don't know how many would look at and say God is a man, but that God is an agent. So if that's what you meant, that it's a thinking being, okay, cool.
Okay, yeah, right. Like an agent, but in some sense, like a force or a being that could take the form of a human. I would say that's something that a lot of theologies, dictate. How God took the form of Jesus Christ, all that stuff.
Yeah, I would think that certainly if you had a being that was God and you were talking about something that was immensely powerful, that taking the form of a human in some sense would be among its capabilities, right. I guess. Sure.
Right. Now my question is, I've actually once did believe in Christianity. I used to practice it. It didn't leave me fulfilled. You know the story. You've gone through this as well.
I was pretty fulfilled. I just became convinced that it wasn't true. But yeah, go ahead.
True. Right. Okay. But it's like you start asking questions. You're like, if a God is like this, and why would it want to take this particular form? Why would it want to take a form that would be recognizable? Why would it feel the necessity to do that? And I feel like a lot of people we're just, I don't know, maybe we're programmed to personify it as something that we would be comfortable with. Maybe something like let me ask you another question. Do you think that if there were a God, it would be something or something that you would be able to have a conversation with?
Well, I would hope so, because for most of the theological doctrines, God serves as essentially the creator of the universe, and we are his special creation, or that there's some sort of relationship type status there. And it would seem to me very strange if there was a God who couldn't communicate with his creation. It would also when you just look at the powers, if you ascribe God with this massive power, God should be capable of communicating with us.
Right.
Yeah, depending on how that God is defined in general.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about that classical definition, then sure.
Yeah, but it seems we're
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We're kind of, I don't know. I'm not going to be in a position of saying, oh, what you're describing isn't a God. It's just that you seem to be kind of cherry picking particular characteristics that, to some extent,
that is exactly what I'm doing. You are correct.
Okay.
I actually do have some ideas, but
so when you get done picking out all the qualities that you want to attribute to the God that you think is real, then the question becomes, what makes you think that God is real?
Because I can contribute it to things that actually occur in the real world.
Like what?
Okay, well, this is, again, going back to the circle of birth, life, death, and rebirth.
Okay.
Now, okay, just bear with me because this does go a little bit down a rabbit hole. Because it's something that applies science, but then you got to think about, okay, science, here's my position. I believe that science is the study of, how our world is formed, how our universe works, all of that. Everything that science claims, I believe.
Okay.
But
that's probably a mistake, but I understand what you mean.
Well, you've made the point that science. We only know universe as science has, as we've studied it and as science has proven it.
The scientific methods are the single most consistently reliable way to accurately model reality. It doesn't mean we're not going to get it wrong, but yes, go ahead.
Correct. So you would say that science is a good definer of how things happen.
Best we've got.
Okay.
So far.
Now, the question that a lot of people don't ask within the science community from what I've noticed, is why do things happen? Like, science is a question of how it shows the process of how things happen, how things are formed, how things are, but we don't really know. We don't really ask the question, or I've never heard of people asking the question of why does this happen?
That's in part because there's a semantic difference where you could reframe any given why question as a how question and vice versa. But what you seem to be getting to is science is addressing the mechanisms by which an event occurred, maybe addressing causal connections, et cetera, but it doesn't address the why in the sense of an intended purpose.
Right.
That's because we have no reason to think that there is an intended purpose.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You'd need to demonstrate an intended purpose. Yeah, okay.
Okay. So that's actually what I'm getting at. This is what the concept that I've been, thinking about.
Cool.
And this is a hypothesis. This is fully a hypothesis.
It may not be. Is it falsifiable?
Okay. Well, it's a theory. Okay.
No. Okay. That's worse.
It's one of those.
It's an idea, perhaps.
Let me just see if I can put it out there for you. Okay. So we look at the world around us, right? We see like everything that happens. We see what we perceive with our eyes, with our ears, with all of our senses. We can see how the process of life works for pretty much everything in the world that we have perceived. We know that animals are born. We know that they live. We know that they die by of natural causes or they're eaten by something. We know that plants have a lifespan, some of them longer than ours, some of them shorter than ours. And we know that eventually those die and, grow back, between the seasons. Or I don't know if it's dying or hibernation, but we know that they go into a state of tranquility. Correct?
Okay.
Well,
it's not the word I'd picked, but I'm good with it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Tranquility.
So
need some of that.
We believe we see all these things happen. We know that they happen. We know that they've been happening for as long as our planet has existed and has been able to support life. So we consider this to be an infallible truth, correct?
No.
It's just the reality that we observe around us.
So there is no infallible truth that we're aware of, and science doesn't make proclamations of truth. Science creates models that are the best current descriptions of this. And so Science is always, by the way, while there is deductive reasoning involved, it is always an inference. So what you're doing is inferring that because we see this consistency of death, life, et cetera, that this is, when you say this is an infallible truth, if you're implying that this is something that could be universally applied, I don't see any justification for that, because that would deny the possibility that we could find out we were wrong about something.
Okay. Yeah, you made a good point. Now, and you mean that through scientific study, we haven't found anything that would disprove that?
Yeah, it would falsify it. So this notion of falsifiability, which is why I kind of balked at your use of the word hypothesis, is that for something to be properly testable, it needs to be falsifiable, which means there needs to be some way to show that this wouldn't be true. So if you say there are no black swans, that is falsifiable, because if you find a black swan, you have just proven that your hypothesis is not true. That's where I'm going. So if you want to begin with a hypothesis that everything that lives eventually dies, I'm fine with that, except it may not be falsifiable, because we're not going to, it may be falsifiable in principle, because you might be able to find something that does not die. But in practice, it's unfalsifiable, because you would have to exist for eternity, which is impossible, to know that it didn't die. And so there are various problems here. But I want you to continue, because we got other callers, and I want to make sure we kind of treat your God hypothesis or concept, idea.
Oh, sure. Okay. I can go into a little bit more detail, but I don't want to waste all of your time. So I could always call back at a later date before we finish up.
Well, I mean, at least give us something that shows how you're going to talk a lot about life, death, and what we know from science. I want to know where this links to a God and what you mean by a God.
Okay. Well, this is I'm going. I apologize. What I'm getting at here, this concept that I'm going with, is it basically identifies, the cycle itself as, a God, but not a God that falls into the norms that theology, dictates.
Okay. So let me ask this. There are people who would say the universe is God.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a reasonable use of the term?
To describe the universe as God?
The universe is God.
No.
Okay.
No.
So because it seems like we're adding something. The universe is the universe. And if we say the universe is God, then we are adding something.
Definition.
And I don't know what that term adds that is true. And I think the same thing applies to this cycle idea that you have. We can refer to the life cycle as just the life cycle. What do we get by also referring to it as God? What does the God label add to it that is accurate?
Well, this is where basically you just have to think outside of the norms of theology. You have to just essentially...
I'm way outside the norms of theology, trust me. I'm asking, if we look at this cycle and we want to say the cycle is God, what is the God label adding that isn't already there in the cycle? And how do you demonstrate that what it is added is true and useful, et cetera?
I don't. I'm equating this cycle to. I'm essentially adding. I'm essentially equating the cycle to God. I'm not essentially adding anything to it.
How is that different from equating the universe with God?
I do not believe that the universe is God. I believe
that doesn't answer the question. So there are people who say the universe is God, and you don't accept that. But you're saying that the cycle is God. And I'm asking, how is that different?
Okay. I believe that the cycle is something that happens throughout the universe. I essentially say that is something that happens, within the boundaries of the universe, and as the universe expands, the cycle expands. That's what I'm saying.
You kind of lost me there a little bit, but even taking the fact that we're observing this life cycle on this planet through science, through the methods and tools of science, and are able to kind of distinguish, the birth phase, the living phase, the death and decay phase, and, being able to observe that cycle. But what Matt is saying is that, saying that is God, that's not adding anything to, what we've observed so far. It's not adding anything to it. So I'm not understanding what putting God on that cycle that we have observed over time is really doing.
If there
what
had
are
never,
your- oh, sorry, go ahead.
if there had never been a God concept, if religions hadn't existed and nobody had offered up this idea of a bearded man in the sky or an all-powerful being or something that exists outside of space-time or all these things, if there hadn't been that concept, do you think you would in any way be arguing that a natural process should be called a God or referred to as a God in that sense?
Do I believe that I would have come up with that, or would it have come up? Would it have happened at any point in time?
Either, I guess.
I may not have understood the question.
Either, I guess, because
Sorry?
my point was this. It
Right.
seems like you are desperately trying to find a use for the God concept. Like you think there's value in the God concept, and so you're looking for a place to put it, and you've decided that the life cycle is the best place to put it.
I wonder if I can word this properly. I believe that science could actually be a way to branch out and create another religion. That's another way that's essentially what I think could happen.
Okay. Now we're on a completely different topic.
A little bit.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't care about religion, and I don't deny that you could create a religion from almost anything. I could create a religion from a rubber band trick or from a scientific finding. You could create a religion out of football. I'm not concerned about religion. You're saying you're calling in to defend a God concept, which isn't religion. It's a statement about something that you believe is true. And so if all you're saying is, I look at the life cycle and it's true, and I'm going to call it God, and I don't mean this offensively, then we've just wasted 20 minutes.
all right. Well, this is why I wanted to ask a question. This is why I wanted to ask a question earlier.
Okay.
This is why I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask what. Sorry, this goes back to when I asked what your ideal personification of God would be. I wanted to see and I know you said that I essentially don't have one at this moment.
Well, I try not to have a set one so that mine may not match the person's. However, in much the same way that somebody calls in and says, I think God is the universe, well, thanks for sharing, but you've offered us absolutely nothing that's edifying. It doesn't tie to theology. It doesn't tie to any classical definitions of God. It's functionally identical to this bottle of Coke Zero is God, or the life cycle is God. All of those things are roughly equivalent to me. You're taking something that we agree is real, and then taking the God label, which we don't agree points to something real, and just putting it co-equal to the thing that's real. What does it add? What does it get us? What's the justification for it? I don't know why we would call the life cycle God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this: Does a God have to fall into? Is it required for a God to fall into what the prior theologies and set religions have, established? Is it necessary for that?
Not necessarily, but if you append it onto a concept that's already established in and of itself, it's not adding anything to that concept, nor is it furthering our understanding of the reality around us. You're just appending it onto something else. It's not just when people say that God is the universe, people will also say, well, God is love. And some people will actually mean that, like the connections that we feel towards each other and our ability to empathize with others, well, that's God. That feeling that you get, that's God. And it's like, well, that's not really explaining anything, that you're just kind of tacking on a term and kind of muddying things up when we kind of have our terms already established for that. It's not really doing much.
It doesn't have to conform to any particular religion's specific notion of a God or any individual's specific notion of God, but there's some set of minimal criteria that through if nothing else, in tradition and common practice, that have established some sort of bare minimum set of qualifications for God. I would think that if you said there was a God that wasn't actually a thinking agent, let me try this in a slightly different way. Peanut butter.
Sure.
When you think of peanut butter, you have something that comes to mind. Now, yours may be chunky, it may be smooth. It may be more oily. It may be, the chemical constituency may be different. But at the end of the day, if I said, this coffee cup is real and I'm going to make it co-equal with peanut butter, you would look at me rather strangely, I would think. I'm holding this in my hand, which we both agree is a coffee cup, and I'm going to call it peanut butter.
Right.
I would think so that's a problem. And so it could be that I'm correct, that there's a really good reason we should all look at this coffee cup and call it peanut butter. But I have to actually make that case. I have to show what adding that label to coffee cup does that justifies me using it. And I don't see that you've even gotten anywhere in the neighborhood of that for life cycle and God. You'd need some.
Okay, well that's essentially what I am trying to do. I know I did not express it properly. I'm not a very good public speaker.
Well, what I'd recommend,
watching this online.
What I'd recommend is put some more thought into it. And if you come up with a better way, by all means, call back and explain it. Somebody else may be here. Somebody else may be able to I don't know, guide you in a way where it makes sense to all of us. But as it stands right now, I don't see any functional difference between saying the universe is God or God is love or this coffee cup is peanut butter. I'm not saying that a God has to be, identical to somebody's particular notion of Yahweh. But if you're not talking about a thinking agent, if you're not talking about, and wouldn't even necessarily have to be the creator of the universe. I'm fine with pantheons of gods that, but there seems to be some bare minimum there. And I don't see it in a life cycle.
What I am saying, what I'm trying to do was essentially convey God in a way that you did describe, but I wanted to convey in a way that actually could be proven through natural justifiable phenomena that actually does happen in our world, stuff that we can perceive.
You're right. It sounds like you're saying that I was right when it seems that you are looking for a way to keep the God label in the absence of any sort of demonstration of any traditional notions of God. And that to me is worrying because it means that you see some value in that label that is worth preserving. And yet when asked what value that label is adding to the life cycle, you don't seem to have an answer.
Yeah, but even in your...
I suppose I could...
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But even in your explanation, it's saying that you were trying to come up with a concept of God that could be proven. It's not at all. You'll just be looking at the same science that establishes that this is the life cycle, and these are the pieces and components of that life cycle. It has nothing to do with this term you've kind of tossed onto it.
Right. What you said before about putting a label on it, putting some meaning behind the label of God, or essentially, putting some. What was it that you said? Putting some what on it?
It seems that you think there's some value in the label that you want to preserve, and so you're looking for something true that you can apply the label to, rather than trying to find out if what the label points to is actually true.
Right, and you're correct. I was putting some value to it because, as I said, this is a concept that could be perceived, and I have chosen to do that. Other people might not. So, and that's basically what I was trying to put out there. But yes, this label does have some value, and I wanted to attribute my own level of value to it. If you don't see that value, that's fine. It's fine. I just want to put a theory out there.
I don't, but I'm aware that there are people who do, and many of the things that they seem to value about the label, I think, can be found in a truthful sense elsewhere.
Sure.
If you value it because of a sense of fairness and justice, first of all, there's no reason to think the universe gives a damn about fairness or justice, but there are people who do. And as I pointed out last Monday in the discussion, it's up to us, as far as I can tell. If you want the world to be fair or just, it's up to us to do that. And it is a kind of lazy cop-out to think that there's some kind of cosmic justice or a God who's going to impose justice. And if that's where the value of the label comes from...
Oh, no.
I'm not saying...
I'm sorry. I didn't cut you off.
I'm not saying that's your thing. I'm just saying that this is one of many reasons why people value the label and their concept of a God. It may not be yours, but think on it and call back sometime and talk about what value you see in it and why you're trying to preserve this label. And by the way, I'm not, theists aren't the only one that do this. Sam Harris and I are pretty friendly, and I think that he's trying to preserve the word
I got that. Absolutely.
spirituality, and I think it's a
cool. I like
garbage
that.
term. But
That's interesting.
anyway, we appreciate the call, Isaiah. You take care and let us know. Think on it. Get back to us.
Sure. Have a good one.
All right.